and other insurance groups have sued the Department of Transportation to bifurcate this decision so that there isn't the Hobson's choice that we mentioned. Clearly, the biggest problem that's arisen out of the decision in the immediate future has been the indecision and the lack of information from the Department of Transportation about whether or not the state belt use laws comply with the criteria. States have been considering the problem, and many of them have felt that they shouldn't have to choose, and so they have designed their belt laws not to comply with Dole's criteria. But they can't get an answer about whether or not, in fact, she won't count this. And we want to urge the subcommittee to put some kind of incentive in this legislation that you're going to be coming forward with as an appropriation to Mrs. Dole to answer those petitions. I might point out that in her own rule, she specifically noted that, quote, under this aspect of the regulation, the department will review each mandatory use law as it is passed to determine whether it meets the minimum criteria established by regulation, end quote. Now that's in her regulation itself. That's what she promised us when she issued it in July, and yet the department has adamantly refused to supply any information to the public. And indeed, Diane Steed testified before Senator Danforth last week that the responses would be given by 1989 to these inquiries. Contrary to the position that the department's taken on not responding to the petitions and requests from many state legislators about whether particular criteria or laws meet the decision that she issued, Mrs. Dole and Diane Steed would like very much to communicate on another subject, and that is they would like to blanket America with information about belt use laws. I listened very carefully this morning to Diane Steed's testimony. I must say that as a registered lobbyist, I was certainly confused about what is lobbying and what isn't lobbying at the end of her testimony when she was asked by you what would be your criteria for success, and answered that it was whether or not belt use laws were passed, but had insisted earlier that the purpose of the money is not to lobby. I certainly was left somewhat confused, as I'm sure the subcommittee was as well. We have some very specific concerns with regard to the $40 million requested for fiscal year 1985 and fiscal year 1986, and I'd like to just state them very briefly. First, we think the amount of money requested is grossly out of proportion with the activities the agency indicates are going to be undertaken, and I must say I was totally shocked when this document, which was released yesterday by the department, has a 2.5-page justification among all these sheets of paper for $20 million, and in fact it is less specific than the plan sent to the subcommittee in November for a $10 million amount. So it's very hard to determine exactly how the money is going to be used, and it's for that reason that we oppose this allocation, and in addition would like to recommend to the subcommittee, if it is considering giving any of these funds at all, it ought to go through the 402 and 403 system, because it will then not be discretionary. It will be quite clearly divided properly, rather than in the discretionary manner in which the department has thus far suggested. But we don't think that the money is justified at all. For example, it's unclear why spend more money on promotion when the existing belt program that they have has not worked. We're particularly shocked to see that they want to give an allocation of money to DOD that has a $300 billion budget. I thought that was more amusing than I could say. Or indeed why they wanted to give $375,000 to private industry, which has raised $20 million on its own and intends to do so each year. I didn't understand why the $1.4 million out of the first 10 requested is to be allocated for media support when there have been so many attempts in the past to do this and none of them have shown to work. Why $20 million this late in the fiscal year? It's almost half over. Why airbags are not mentioned in the November 1984 justification for the first $10 million when it's widely acknowledged, as you yourself indicated, that most people know why it's important to wear belts, but they know very little about airbags and how they work. Diane Steed uses the term passive restraints all the time, and I would urge the subcommittee in its committee report to insist that the word airbag be used when they mean airbag and automatic belts when they mean automatic belts, because I think most of the time passive restraints to DOT today means passive belts. In addition, if the Secretary is truly interested in encouraging manufacturers to offer airbags for sale, it's unclear why they don't want to have a lot of money to educate the public in that area. Secondly, with the motor vehicle manufacturer's commitment of $20 million through their new organization, Traffic Safety Now, it seems to me that's an awful lot of money and enough to do this job that the administration is talking about. Third, I have a particular concern, and that is there is a disagreement between many safety organizations and the department over this decision. And even in the initial meetings that the departments had with state legislators, the groups that oppose the Dole decision have not been invited. They've been excluded. So I have a feeling that this money is going to be used quite selectively. And I would urge the committee to clarify that this money cannot be used in such a manner. Fourth, the $20 million requested each year amounts to 20% of NHTSA's entire budget. And there's some other pressing needs in that agency. For example, the entire vehicle safety research program is only $11 million now. And the biomechanics program, which is the crucible of this work, is very underfunded, I believe, compared to what needs to be done. In fact, the administration itself has ignored this area almost entirely. And what's happening is that even contractors aren't bidding in the biomechanics program because there's so little money available. And other high payoff areas are suffering from lack of funding. For example, technical consumer information. The car book was eliminated, the tire quality grading program was eliminated, and the consumer crashworthiness information program was eliminated. Fifth, while DOT denies that any of these funds are going to be used to lobby for enactment of laws, I don't think there's any question that when you look through the various aspects of the program, you see that that's clearly their intent. And then finally, to the extent the committee intends to fund this program, we urge it to designate the amounts for belts and for bags individually, because I think that's extremely important. There's been a history since this program was first announced of trying to undermine the airbag portion of it through the Deputy Secretary's office. Mr. Burnley had a lot of miscommunication sent to the Hill, the Congress last summer. It was finally clarified by Mrs. Dole in September, and then the program has come up and again has been causing confusion about exactly how this money is to be used. I think given the performance of the DOT to date and its refusals to respond to requests for interpretation, I hope that the committee will use its enormous muscle with the Department of Transportation and see that that does occur, and I would urge you to do so. Just in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to say that almost continuously since I became administrator of NHTSA in 1977, I have come to this committee begging for additional money for this highway safety program. And I have done that because I believe in it, and it's one of the highest payoff programs in the government. The department itself estimates that 80,000 lives have been saved since 1968 when the crash standards were first put into effect. That's a very measurable payoff compared to the payoff we're talking about with this program, which is vague and undefined, and I believe badly stated by the administrator. In fact, I don't think they really understand how to measure the payoff from it. So I just wanted to put that in conclusion, that this is an unusual position for me to take before this committee.
Ms. Faber, my impression this morning was that Ms. Steed implied that basically the three-point restraints were as effective as the airbags. How do you feel about that?
Well, in the decision by the Secretary of Transportation, that's the answer to that question is spelled out quite clearly, and I'd like to submit this for the record, but it does state on page 28986 that the most effective system is an airbag plus a lap belt and shoulder belt. So clearly the airbag is an essential element there for saving lives. I think particularly in crashes over about 30 miles an hour, and that's where the standard is set at 30. You have head strikes and facial injury with belts on, even with belts on, and that the airbag serves this essential function of protecting the brain and the eyes and the other essential elements of the human body. Could I amend that one word?
Actually, it shouldn't be mutually exclusive anyhow.
No, that's right. And I do want to say one other thing. Diane Steed said this morning that you need a lap belt for an airbag to work, and I think that's a misstatement. The airbag works in a frontal and front angular crash. You need a lap belt for the other modes of crash, but for the frontal crash, where 50% of the deaths occur, an airbag plus a knee bar, it works just fine. And so even if people refuse to wear their belts, which I don't think they should, but even if they do, you're still going to have a tremendous life saving from the airbag alone.
You, as former administrator of NHTSA, you spent money on media for safety reasons.
Not much.
But, if you wanted to raise the usage of seat belts by 1%, how much money do you think you'd have to spend on media?
Well, I don't know that any amount of money that you spend on media would guarantee that for you, Mr. Chairman. I think there have been so many studies by industry and government over the past 15 years to try and find out the answer to that question, and I don't think anyone's shown that you even can nationwide raise it 1%.
In other words, you think there's no direct correlation between media advertising and the use of seat belts?
I don't think there's any direct relationship there. I do think that when all elements of the population, and that includes the automotive industry and the safety organizations and state legislators and national legislators, decide that this is going to be a common goal, I think that you can build a movement, and I think that's been shown in Mothers Against Drunk Driving. I think that in 1977, when the first child restraint law was enacted, I was faced with the proposition of whether or not to also try and urge the enactment of mandatory seatbelt use laws or safety belt use laws. And I felt that we ought to go the route of child restraints first because I thought that was more acceptable, it was the easiest, and I thought it would get the concept ingrained. And so that's what we did. And I think that that has proven to be a good idea. But I don't think that you have any guarantee from just advertisements alone that that's going to work.
Mr. Kaufman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up on the Chairman's question, you do agree with NHTSA's current estimates of the effectiveness of belts and airbags, I take it then?
Yes, I've quoted from the Department of Transportation's own study. All right.
And I guess given that about 40% of accidents are other than frontal accidents, you would need the seatbelt as well as the airbag.
Oh, absolutely. I'm an advocate of it, of seatbelts. I have no disagreement on that score at all. What I don't like is having to choose between one and the other, because I don't think that safety belts are superior to airbags, and that's the presumption one must draw from the way the rule is written.
What is your opinion of belt use laws? Do you think they'll work?
Well, I think that belt use laws are going to meet some opposition. Generally what happens with these kinds of laws, and our experience in other countries shows that initially there's very high usage, people think they're going to be heavily enforced, and then it starts to drop off. And I think your statement this morning, Mr. Coughlin, about the New Jersey law is a good example. As soon as people see that it's not enforced because there's only secondary enforcement allowed, I think people who don't want to wear their belts anyway aren't going to. I think it is going to increase usage to a certain extent. It's unclear how much. I think Diane Steed said that she expected 50% usage. That means half the people still aren't wearing them. So that's a substantial number. The other problem is the studies by the Department of Transportation show that the people least likely to wear safety belts voluntarily or even with the law are the most likely to be involved in crashes, so that your death reduction and your injury reduction are not commensurate with the increase in the usage until it gets up to like 85 or 90%.
But your proposed rule, I guess, would not call for all airbags, right?
No, Standard 208, as it was issued by Secretary Adams and as it has been reissued in the vehicle side by Secretary Dole, it allows either automatic belts or airbags. I now believe, Mr. Coughlin, that it would be preferable to have an all-airbag requirement, and I'd like to say why, if you would permit me. First of all, I think that many auto companies, particularly the smaller ones, are quite concerned about having to make a choice between which system to put in their cars. And once they make that decision under this rule, then if they've made the wrong one, if airbags turn out to be more popular than safety belts, for example, and people don't want the automatic safety belts, then they're in real trouble, and it takes a couple of years to change the tooling and so on. It's much cheaper if you have airbags across the board. Number three, they're unobtrusive. They don't get in your way. They're not irritating. And most people who say they don't want airbags, it's because they don't like any kind of mandatory requirement, whether it's mandatory seatbelt use laws or whether it's collapsible steering assemblies or laminated windshields. Number four, the automatic feature of airbags is very appealing, as it has saved 80,000 lives since 1968. More than that, really, now, maybe probably 88 or so, 1,000 lives since 1968. The automatic provisions for safety in cars do work. They're like automatic sprinklers, and they're like pasteurized milk. They work because people just accept them as they find the car. And so I think from the industry point of view, I think from the consumer point of view in terms of price, I think that what we ought to do is to bite this bullet that we've been struggling with for the past 15 years and just say that the performance characteristics has to be an inflatable restraint in cars. That is now the position that I have come to after seeing the tremendous struggle over this issue for so many years.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I just had a couple, I know you got a vote on here. You're not part of any coalition opposed to this or calling legislators asking to vote against this, are you?
Going against
The seatbelt legislation?
No, the position that our coalition has taken is that we would like to see laws that do not overrule Standard 208. Mrs. Dole has set up a situation where if the mandatory seatbelt use laws are passed meeting certain criteria that she spelled out, then Standard 208 will be automatically rescinded if 2/3 of the population is covered by 1989. What we have talked to state legislators about is designing seatbelt use laws that do not meet her criteria so they cannot be counted to overrule Standard 208, so that we will end up with mandatory seatbelt use laws and automatic restraints in cars, both. That is the finest safety system.
You're not encouraging legislators to put amendments on the bills to sunset those pieces of legislation, are you?
The provision that we designed, we believe, would put Mrs. Dole in a Hobson's choice and would not end up sunsetting the seatbelt use laws. It's a little bit complicated to explain, but I'll be glad to do it if you wish, or I can do it when you come back for the vote.
Well, I'm not quite clear on what you were saying.
Well, what it would do is it says that if a decision is made, a determination is made on April 1, 1989, which is the deadline date for 2/3 of the population being covered, if a determination is made on that date that 2/3 of the population are covered by mandatory seatbelt use laws, then the belt use law in which this provision is inserted would be sunsetted. Now, if you have that provision in a number of laws, then the determination can never be made because the belt use law must still be in effect under Mrs. Dole's rule by September 1989, and it wouldn't be. So she could never make that decision. It would put her in the same Hobson's choice that she has put the people who would like to see both, that is, the improvement in the vehicle design as well as the mandatory seatbelt use laws.
Well, I have some other questions, but I know we have a vote, so I'll yield back the balance of my time and submit those for a record.
You want to put in for the record?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Wolf, you have a question? We should wait for... Well, we'll catch you when we come back. About 15 minutes, Joan Claybrook back for one more line of questioning. Mr. Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had one question, Ms. Claybrook, and that is, are you opposed or do you support the reprogramming money for Mrs. Dole's program? Given the fact that the choice is one or the other, if that's what it was down to, do you favor the reprogramming or would you rather see it not go through?
No, I would not favor doing that.
So you would rather do nothing than do that?
I think that even if the committee should decide to allocate new money, for example, I think it ought to, first of all, go through the 402, 403 existing structure and not be just totally discretionary money. I think one of the real problems with the program plan is that it's very unclear how it's going to operate because it doesn't have all of the existing procedural provisions associated with it that the program now has, and those were taken originally from the highway planning system. They were adopted in 1966 for the highway safety program from the highway program, and I think that they should apply to these funds in addition, because people then understand how they're allocated and what the rules of the game are, and here they're totally discretionary. So I think that that's really an important feature. In terms of reprogramming, I think that there are some programs that are desperately underfunded at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and as I mentioned, I've always been begging this committee as an advocate for increasing the funding for a very important life-saving program. And yet in this case, I feel that it's so badly justified in this document. There are 2.5 pages in here justifying a $20 million new program, and I just think that that's not sufficient. People don't really understand what it means, so that's the position.
So you'd rather have none. The other question is, I heard you say before we were leaving that you didn't think that advertising made any impact. What do you base that on?
Well, I'd be glad to submit for the record all the studies that have been done, but over the last 15 years, I think there have been 3 or 4 government programs, and certainly that number of industry programs that have been conducted in a very detailed manner, attempt to measure whether or not advertising on television or radio really could influence belt usage. That's what I mean by does it make any difference. And the evaluations that have been done by the Department of Transportation and by private groups have shown that it doesn't increase belt usage. That's what I was referring to. That's not to say that you can't have, and I believe that it is possible to have a broad-gauged effort to try and change people's attitudes. I think that the work done by the Department of Transportation, for example, beginning in 1973, the theme was don't let a friend drive drunk. And I think it changed people's own point of view about their responsibility for interfering in someone else's business, which previously most people just wouldn't do. So I think that you can change public attitudes, but I think it is a long-term effort. And certainly in order to change the attitude that people have towards safety belts, it does take some dramatic activity, and I think that mandatory seatbelt use laws certainly are that. In 1978, I wrote a letter to every governor in the United States, and I asked if they would support a mandatory seatbelt use law, because that was an issue then on our docket, and not one governor would. So certainly there is a different point of view. I mean, the auto industry here now has decided to put $20 million into this, and it has made a big difference. I'm sorry that it took an incentive to get rid of airbags for them to be willing to do that. But they have now decided that this is their program because they have this incentive, and so they are, and it has made a difference. And I think that you can change public attitudes, but I think it takes a very long time. To change behavior is much harder. And the use laws, or the age 21 drinking requirements, or the child restraint usage laws, I think can change public behavior, but I don't think pure advertising does that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, John. And we next have Douglas Ferguson, Director of Safety.
When they get up.
Yeah, Mr. Dr. Cowley, and is it Dr. Kelly or Mr. Kelly?
We have one doctor and one sister.
Okay. I would like to read a statement from Senator Mathias for the record. He would wish he could have been here. He says, I regret that my schedule does not permit me to appear before your committee today to introduce a most distinguished Marylander who will present testimony on seatbelt safety. His name is Dr. R. Adams Cowley, Director of the Maryland Institute for Emergency Medical Services System in Baltimore. Under his leadership, Maryland has passed one milestone after another, advancing EMS capability throughout the country and around the world. It is my understanding that you too are a fan of Dr. Cowley's, and I would like to take this opportunity to invite you and your colleagues to visit the Maryland Institute and the National Study Center for Emergency Medical Systems sometime in the near future to see the latest developments firsthand. I know of the long-standing commitment to provide all Americans with quality emergency service, and I look forward to working with you toward that goal. And personally, I'm looking forward to Dr. Cowley and some of his colleagues coming down to Dade County to help us put in our EMS and a shock trauma center to model after what you have in Baltimore. You've done a fantastic job. And did you bring any of your books with you?
No.
I'll have to write for some more.
We'll send them.
You may proceed.
Mr. Chairman, I will start off first, I guess, because Cowley, C-O-W-L-E-Y, is a lot different than Kelly. Our folks are from the Isle of Man, and he's just a plain Irishman. What I would like to talk about is...
what do you call the people from the Isle of Man? Manx?
Manxmen. From the Manx cat, the
You call them what?
bobtail cat, Manx, M-A-N-X.
You are a Manx.
Yeah. But, you know, we're out there in the Irish Sea, and we have our own parliament, and we fight the Irish and the English equally well. You have my testimony here, and what I'm going to do is not talk about it, but I want to talk about some other things that aren't in the testimony, if I may, sir. And I think one of the problems that we have with seatbelt legislation is the same that we had with helmet laws for motorcyclists. In our state, we had mandatory, federal mandatory motorcycle helmet laws, and then sort of disappeared, and these people came in our legislature in massive droves, and you couldn't even get in to testify. But what they were talking about, which I think is the same problem with seat belts, and I haven't heard it discussed here today, and that is freedom of choice. Everybody talks about, well, I don't want seat belts. If I do, I should have the freedom of choice. On motorcycle helmets, I should have the freedom of choice. Well, in Maryland today, you've got the freedom of choice. Also, you've got a 40% increase in mortality since that law in our state has been rescinded. The problem with education, as I see it, I don't think you're going to educate very many people my age. No matter how much money you spend on it. And I would think that a great deal of money put out by the Department of Transportation should be towards high school education. Get these kids involved with the various techniques and so forth in order to accomplish the mission. About seat belts themselves, I think there should be automatic protection. I think you should be able to get in your car, sit down, turn on the key, and you're protected quick as that car moves. And you're protected by both a 3-point seat belt and a airbag. And you have the best of all worlds. And people say it's very costly. Well, sure, it's possibly costly. It wouldn't if everybody had it. And it came right out of the factory that way because boy, you sure put in the very expensive super Panasonic radios and air conditioners and everything else in your car, and they're not saving your lives. And I'm telling you, from what I see in my program in 15 years, when you have a head-on, you get to hear plenty of music and also see a few stars. And what I'm trying again to say is that it should be automatic protection. And it shouldn't be whether you want freedom or not. If it was freedom of choice, and our colleagues in the automobile world talk about costs and so forth, well, then why don't we have two-wheel brakes? You know, it'd be cheaper. You ought to be able to have that choice. I'd like $1,000 knocked off my car and just use 2 brakes or 1 windshield wiper, these things. And some of these things sound kind of foolish, but it isn't foolish, because for 15 years I've been going down to talk to the families after I've operated on some of these people and to tell them that they are dead or this type of thing, and it is a terrible thing, because you gentlemen here, with the stroke of a pen, can do more to abolish trauma than we physicians all over the country can do ever. And that's why it's so important to be able and request to give testimony here. We look at the airlines. You know, a gentleman over here said, well, why do you think people don't want to wear seat belts? Well, they don't on airlines. You know, the only reason a lot of people use seat belts on airlines, you got that beautiful girl walking up and down the hall telling you that plane isn't going to fly unless you buckle up, and so forth. And you don't have that in your system at home. I think it's apathy. I think it's not going to happen to me, as you spoke about a little earlier today, that type of thing. I think the public needs to know in an educational program the total system. The public needs to know about total restraints, not just seat belts, so that they can make a better decision. And an informed public will always pretty much make the right decision. And you've got to have some kind of a goal system, like the MAD mothers with alcoholism and so forth. I've seen alcohol programs come and go. I've seen seatbelt programs in 15 years come and go. Education programs, both of the groups, same back and forth and so forth. But alcoholism, the last 4 years, is really moving because the public is angry and they want something done. And these alcohol programs are beginning to work and show evidence of success. And I would say the same thing, some way, is needed in passive restraints or automatic restraints. But it isn't just seat belts. You should be as totally protected as possible, and you shouldn't have to worry about whether you're protected or not. All you should worry about is whether your car is going to start or whether you're going to have this. Because I don't know a single person in this room that's going to get home tonight. That's how bad it is. Or whether they're going to be in some trauma center or whether they're going to be dead. And finally, vaccines work. They work by prevention. And passive restraints, automatic restraints, they work by protection. And my golly, if you don't do something like this, you're going to have 1,000,000 trauma centers to handle the problem because it's going up like that. It's an epidemic problem. In our state, it's continuing to grow, even though we've had a lot of things happen. And here I think we have the best system in the country for a total system, and yet 2 weeks ago we lost our seatbelt legislative initiative. And gee, if anybody could have gotten it, I think we should have gotten it. But it was this thing, freedom of choice.
Put you out of business.
That would be the greatest thing in my career for us to get out of business. And with that, I will go ahead and let Ben here tell you about what he wants to talk about.
Thank you, Dr. Cowley. It has been my great privilege to be on the same side of the motor vehicle safety issue as Dr. Cowley for 25 years, and I would hate to be on the other side from him. He's a very powerful witness. Mr. Chairman, I appear today at the request of the National Coalition to Reduce Car Crash Injuries, and if I may, I will submit for the record later some background information on the coalition. The coalition's asked me to address the issue of automobile crash restraint educational programs, and specifically those being carried out or planned by the U.S. Department of Transportation. And I'd like to use as my text some quotes from Secretary Dole's July 11, 1984 decision mandating passive restraints in future new cars. In that decision, Mrs. Dole said these things, quote, "Some people have serious fears or concerns about airbags. If airbags were required in all cars, these fears, albeit unfounded, could lead to a backlash affecting the acceptability of airbags. These consumer perceptions must be recognized as real concerns." And then she said, "Public education and the performance of automatic restraints will be the key factors in determining the long-run public acceptance of automatic restraints." In those words, did Mrs. Dole highlight the need for an intensive program to inform the public of the life-saving, injury-reducing facts about passive restraint technology, and particularly airbag technology. The department, as we know, for years has been directing efforts at informing the public about the benefits of safety belts, and they've been joined by insurance companies and automobile manufacturers. But to date, whether from lack of motivation or lack of funds, the department has failed to initiate a commensurate effort to combat what Mrs. Dole called the unfounded, serious fears or concerns that the public harbors about airbag technology. Meanwhile, the public continues to be subjected to misinformation about passive restraints. For example, a few months after Secretary Dole's decision, the Chief Executive Officer of Chrysler Corporation, Lee Iacocca, published an autobiography in which Mr. Iacocca made these statements. "There are big problems with airbags," he said. "They are effective only if they're used together with a seatbelt," Mr. Iacocca said. "They work only in head-on collisions," he said. "They're of no help at all in multiple impact crashes," he said. "They can go off inadvertently," Mr. Iacocca said, "and when this happens, the airbag can lead to injury or even death. An airbag blowing up at the wrong time can throw the driver in the back and lead to an accident." Now, Mr. Iacocca's book has been a bestseller for months, So that's a very attentive and huge audience for such basic fear-fostering misinformation about the passive restraint technology, whose public fears and concerns, albeit unfounded, to quote Mrs. Dole, DOT has taken note of. The facts, of course, are well documented in DOT's own records and her decision. Airbags substantially improve protection, both for belted and unbelted occupants. They complement, not replace, seat belts. Both airbags and belts have vital roles to play in reducing crash injuries. Even if airbags did work only in head-on collisions, that's to their great credit. They provide protection for the head, face, and spinal column across a range of speeds, including speeds too high for belts to provide adequate protection. And since frontal impacts account for more than half of all occupant deaths, the contribution of airbags to reducing fatalities clearly will be extraordinary. On and on and on, DOT has the answers to those pieces of misinformation contained in Mr. Iacocca's book and in many, many other sources. DOT, of course, and this committee and most of us in this room today know the facts about passive restraint technology and its benefits. But unlike Mr. Iacocca's book, this testimony and the record of this hearing won't be purchased and read attentively by millions of Americans. The strong negative reaction by the public to passive restraints, and I quote Secretary Coleman's decision in 1976, continues to be insufficiently corrected. A program at least as well-funded, sincere, and aggressive as DOT's belt promotion program is required to do the job effectively. A program that clearly bears the federal government's imprimatur and is funded at expenditures for belt use, funded at levels no less and arguably greater than levels of DOT's expenditures for belt use educational activities. Since airbags are, according to DOT, the most misunderstood of the passive restraint systems, airbags clearly deserve the most vigorous attention in such an educational program, to educate and to demonstrate the efficiency and effectiveness of airbags as stated by the Secretary herself. Mr. Chairman, let me show you a brief piece of Department of Transportation footage that more dramatically than anything I can say underscores what I'm talking about, if we may. Can we knock the lights? We're going to be looking here at a series of 35-mile-an-hour crash tests run by the government, looking at 10 typical new cars, and we are seeing these run with dummies wearing lap and shoulder belts. This is part of the new car assessment program of the U.S. Department of Transportation. I emphasize that these are dummies with belts on. And you will see, as you just saw in the car here, and we're seeing now in the Chevrolet Caprice coming up, you will see that in each case, despite the protection that the belts give, and they do give protection, still heads are impacting steering wheels and columns, spinal cords are being wrenched, and damage is being done to faces and possibly to brains. The '84 Toyota Tercel, and we've seen already a number of American-made cars. It is for protection against this kind of impact in these crashes that airbags, even with belts, are needed so badly. Here's the '84 Plymouth Colt. Again, I emphasize each one of these driver dummies is belted. The '84 Ford Tempo. Drivers of GSA airbag cars won't experience this if they're in a crash because those cars will give them the airbag protection. The '84 Renault wagon. We have a vertical turning over here. The '84 Pontiac T1000. Again, violent contact of the head and the steering wheel and column that would be completely prevented by airbags. And this is why it's a Hobson's choice. This is why both systems are needed so badly. And finally, the '84 Nissan Stanza. Another violent head impact of a belted dummy. And we'll look now here. These happen to be 30-mile-an-hour crash tests. Footage is available from DOT, which we can put in your file. This is the all-mechanical breed system. Footage is available of Mercedes airbag and Volvo airbag tests going up to 40 and even 50 miles an hour in the This one happens to be the one that is going to be sold for that in the mass market. And this is the airbag. That's the end of the film. Thank you. And that is the difference in protection between having only one system and having both. The total, as Dr. Cowley said, protection. Thank you.
It seems to me that each one of those head-on 35-mile-an-hour crashes were identical. The same dumb as you could run one crash and see them all. There was no difference in one and the other.
There's no reason to think that in a typical 35-mile-an-hour head-on collision, with your belts on, you're still not going to have your head and face smashed into a steering wheel, steering column in any car.
Let me just say something as a surgeon. We've handled this problem with the seat belts. We have at our place all the time now plastic surgeons, because the general surgeons can't fix their face up well enough. And you've got to have this kind of preparation for this. You have a lovely young girl and their face is splattered all over the steering wheel. That girl, with a general surgeon's repair, generally, she's going to need 4 years of staged operations in order to get looking good enough to get married. While the plastic surgeon, he can help cut down that long period of time.
Well, what you're saying is, and well, I understand it, is whether you have voluntary restraints or whether you have passive restraints or whether you have three-point restraints, if you hit something head-on going 35 miles an hour, you're going to receive serious head and face injuries.
Not if you use airbags.
If you have an
I say
airbag.
without airbags.
Yeah, without
I
airbags,
said,
yes,
no,
sir.
no matter, I said with three-point passive or voluntary seatbelt restraints, without airbags, no matter how many belts you got on and how they're fastened, that if you hit something going 35 miles an hour head-on, that you're going to have, in practically every case, a serious head or facial injury.
You know, Mr. Chairman, the ranking of these
Is that
injuries is interesting. Yes, it is true. The Department of Transportation uses a medical index, and properly so. And when it talks about serious injury, it's talking about things such as brain damage that may be irreversible, spinal cord severance, that sort of thing. Now, it may not seem technically to be a serious injury to have your face bones smashed up and to go through 4 or 5 years of surgery to have your eyeballs put back in place. That's so-called moderate injury. I do not want to be moderately injured because the U.S. government did not give me an airbag in that 35-mile-an-hour crash, or the manufacturers wouldn't sell me one. And as to serious and fatal injuries, the airbag is going to be the biggest single preventer of that kind of injury in every high-speed crash.
Well, according to, I asked the same question to Ms. Claybrook, my understanding from Ms. Steed is that the three-point belts were equally effective as the airbag, but apparently from your film and your statements that this is certainly not the case on the frontal collisions.
If Mrs. Steed would like, and I make this offer advisedly, and actually I'm really echoing Clarence Ditlow of the Center for Auto Safety, who made the same offer years ago. If Mrs. Steed would like to ride side by side in a car with me in her three-point lap shoulder belt into a wall at 25 miles an hour and give me an airbag alone, we'll see what her choice is. I don't think she'd do it.
I think also a few visits to your center up in Baltimore, especially to the where you take your most injured people, is really a traumatic experience even for those that visit that area. I know it's...
Well, sir, we have 2,000 people this year coming in by helicopter, and they're the most serious injured generally in our state. And they're there a long time. And I think if we had a automatic restraint system of seat belts and airbags, we would lose over 50% of our patients. And the second thing is the morbidity, which in non-medical terms, the injuries where you don't die are so much less to have the problem taken care of.
You could almost close up your intensive care unit.
Yeah, we'd like that.
Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you very much. Certainly very compelling testimony. Can you tell us how the cars that we saw performed in relation to the injury criteria measurements set by NHTSA?
I will be happy to submit the specific injury criteria readings for each of those crashes, Mr. Coughlin. Some passed and some didn't. I again emphasize that pass does not mean that one walked away from the crash, as test dummies would have from up to 50-mile-an-hour crashes of the airbag-equipped research safety vehicles built by the department a few years ago. Here, to pass or to be below 1,000 head injury, for instance, a scale, simply means not to have had fatal levels of brain or spinal cord injury. One can still have literally a face that is smashed for life and a brain that's hurt for life and, quote, pass the test. But I'll be happy to submit those for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Arthritis, it'll hurt for life.
Could I add one other thing? You're not going to get all of these things today. The system is here today. They can be put in now. But what I'm saying is there's got to be also, as the Department of Transportation says, there's got to be an educational program, because you've got to educate these people to the seat belts, which they have, and the things until the other things come along. So there should be a very important educational program.
Thank you both for being here with us today, and I'll see you again soon. Mr. Hurley? Thank you, Mr. Hurley, and we will, without objection, we'll submit your testimony in full.